Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a sound that carries across the void of space, faint at first, like the distant rumble of thunder rolling across a plain you cannot see. It grows, steadily and without mercy, until it fills the darkness between stars with a terrible promise. It is the sound of engines, vast and ancient, pushing warships the size of cities through the cold emptiness. It is the sound of boots on metal decking, thousands upon thousands of armored feet, marching in time to hymns that have not changed in 10,000 years. It is the sound of prayers being whispered in the dark, of oaths being sworn over blades that have tasted the blood of 1,000,000 worlds. And beneath it all, like a heartbeat that refuses to stop, no matter how many centuries pass, there is the sound of war. Endless, unrelenting, beautiful, terrible war. But this is the sound of the Black Templars. They are the chapter that never stops. The warriors who heard the call to crusade 10 millennia ago and decided, with a conviction that borders on madness, that they would never answer any other call again. While other chapters of the Adeptus Astartes maintain their fortress monasteries, tend to their homeworlds, and wait for the next conflict to find them, the Black Templars go looking for it. They hunt for war the way a predator hunts for prey, with patience and persistence and an appetite that can never be fully satisfied. They do not garrison. They do not rest. They do not retire to their halls to contemplate the meaning of their existence or the mysteries of their gene seed. They fight. And when the fighting is done on one world, they board their ships and sail through the howling nightmare of the warp to find the next world that needs their particular brand of salvation. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the Black Templars are the ones who took that statement as a personal mission rather than a cosmic observation. And they have been carrying it out, without pause and without apology, for longer than most civilizations have existed. But what makes them different? What separates the Black Templars from the hundreds of other Space Marine chapters that serve the Imperium of man? It is not simply their aggression, though they possess that in abundance. It is not merely their skill at arms, though few can match them in the brutal art of close combat. It is not even their numbers, which far exceed what the Codex Astartes would permit. Had anyone the courage or the authority to enforce such rules upon them? No. What makes the Black Templars unique, what sets them apart from every other chapter in existence, is their faith. The Black Templars believe, with every fiber of their enhanced beings, that the Emperor of mankind is a god. Not a powerful psyker who happened to unite humanity during its darkest hour. Not a brilliant scientist who engineered the greatest warriors the galaxy has ever known. Not a political leader whose secular imperial truth was meant to shield humanity from the predations of chaos. None of that. To the Black Templars, the Emperor is divine. He is the God Emperor, the master of mankind, the Golden Throne's eternal occupant, whose sacrifice keeps the Astronomicon burning and the warp at bay. And they serve him not as soldiers serve a commander, but as knights serve their lord and king, with a devotion that transcends duty and enters the realm of worship. This faith is the engine that drives the eternal crusade. It is the fire that burns in the hearts of every Black Templar, from the lowliest neophyte to the High Marshal himself. It makes them fearless in the face of horrors that would shatter lesser warriors. It makes them relentless in the pursuit of the Emperor's enemies, whether those enemies are the twisted servants of chaos, the alien races that infest the galaxy, or the mutants and witches whose very existence is an affront to the purity of the human form. The Black Templars do not merely fight against these things, they crusade against them. There is a difference, and it is measured in blood and prayer and the smoking ruins of worlds that once harbored the Emperor's foes. So, settle in, get comfortable, because the story of the Black Templars is not a short one. It spans 10,000 years of unbroken warfare, and it begins, as so many great stories do, with a single man whose conviction was so powerful that it shaped the destiny of an entire chapter for millennia to come. His name was Sigismund, and he was, by any measure you care to apply, one of the greatest warriors the Imperium has ever produced. Let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to a time when the galaxy was younger and the Imperium was not yet the crumbling edifice it would become. Let us go back to the age when gods walked among men, when the Primarchs led their legions across the stars, and when the future of humanity hung in the balance between hope and oblivion. Let us go back to the time of Sigismund, as the first champion, Sigismund and the seeds of the Crusade. To understand the Black Templars, you must first understand the man who made them. And to understand Sigismund, you must understand what he came from, because the soil from which he grew was as harsh and unforgiving as the warrior it produced. Sigismund was born on Terra itself, during the final violent years of the Unification Wars. The exact details of his early life are shrouded in the fog of millennia, but what is known paints a picture of a childhood defined by loss and survival. He came from the Ionis Plateau, a region of Terra that had been consumed by the fires of the Emperor's conquest. The city where he was born was destroyed during the wars, burned to ash and memory. And young Sigismund was left an orphan in the refugee camps that dotted the landscape like scars on wounded flesh. In those camps, survival was not guaranteed. Gangs roamed the makeshift settlements, preying on the weak and the defenseless. Sigismund was protected, for a time, by a young girl named Thera, who used whatever she could find, a metal bar, her own fists, her sheer will, to keep the predators at bay. It was a harsh education in the realities of a universe that did not care about fairness or mercy, and it planted something in the young boy that would grow into the bedrock of his character. A conviction that the strong existed to protect the weak. That duty was not something you chose, but something that chose you. That the only honorable response to a hostile universe was to stand your ground and fight. And when the Emperor's forces came through the camps looking for recruits, looking for young men whose bodies and spirits could withstand the agonizing transformation into something more than human, Sigismund was among those selected. He was taken into the ranks of the 7th Legion, the Imperial Fists, and placed under the command of their Primarch, Rogal Dorn. The man known as the Praetorian of Terra, the builder of fortresses, the unbreaking wall against which the enemies of the Imperium would dash themselves to pieces. Dorn was not an easy master. He demanded perfection from his sons, a standard that was as relentless as it was unforgiving. The Imperial Fists were known for their discipline, their stoicism, their ability to endure punishment that would break other legions. They were the siege specialists, the masters of fortification, as the warriors you called when you needed something held at all costs. And among all of Dorn's sons, Sigismund rose the fastest and climbed the highest. He became the first captain of the Imperial Fists, the commander of the elite Templar Brethren, and Rogal Dorn's right hand. His skill with a blade was legendary, even among the Legion's Astartes, a brotherhood that included some of the most formidable fighters the galaxy had ever produced. Sigismund could match any champion, best any duelist, and cut his way through enemies that would give even other Space Marines pause. But it was not merely his martial prowess that set him apart. It was the intensity of his belief. Even during the Great Crusade, when the Emperor's own imperial truth held that there were no gods, that religion was a crutch for weak minds, that the universe could be understood through reason and science alone, Sigismund struggled with questions of faith. He had seen things during the conquest of the galaxy, hints and whispers of something greater, something divine, that the cold rationalism of the imperial truth could not adequately explain. When he encountered Euphrati Keeler, a civilian attached to the Sons of Horus fleet, who had become one of the first worshippers of the Emperor as a deity, something shifted inside him. He witnessed the powers she manifested through her faith, the way she could drive back demons and command the forces of the warp through nothing more than her belief in the Emperor's divinity. And something deep inside Sigismund's soul responded to that faith, like a bell responding to a hammer. This inner conflict would define him. It would make him the warrior he became. And it would, in time, shape the chapter he founded into the most zealous and devout brotherhood of space marines the Imperium has ever known. But before any of that could happen, the galaxy had to burn. The Horus heresy. There are no words in any human language adequate to describe the scope of that catastrophe. The War Master Horus, greatest of the Emperor's sons, the most beloved and trusted of all the Primarchs, turned against his father and plunged the Imperium into a civil war that would scar humanity for eternity. Half the Space Marine legions turned traitor. Entire sectors burned. Worlds that had stood for centuries were reduced to cinders in days. The dream of the Great Crusade, the vision of a united humanity striding confidently toward a golden future. He died screaming in the fires of betrayal. The Imperial fists bore the weight of that catastrophe more heavily than most. Rogel Dawn was tasked with the defense of Terra itself, with turning the Imperial Palace into a fortress that could withstand the combined might of the traitor legions. For years, the Imperial fists labored to prepare the defenses, building walls upon walls, fortifying positions that were already nearly impregnable, turning every corridor and courtyard of the vast palace complex into a killing ground. Sigismund was at his father's side through all of it, his blade always ready, his faith burning brighter with each passing day. And then, the traitors came. The Siege of Terra was the defining battle of the Horus heresy, the moment when the fate of the entire galaxy hung in the balance. Meanwhile, the traitor legions descended upon humanity's cradle world like a tide of corruption and rage, bringing with them the demons of the warp and the terrible power of the chaos gods themselves. The sky burned. The earth shook. The walls that Dawn had built with such care and precision crumbled under bombardments that would have leveled mountains. During this apocalyptic siege, Rogel Dawn made a decision that would echo through the millennia. He looked at his first captain, at the warrior whose skill with a blade was unmatched in all the Imperium, and he gave him a singular honor. Sigismund was named the Emperor's champion. He was given the finest armor the Legion possessed, the most lethal weapons in its armory, and he was sent forth with a single, his sacred purpose, to seek out and destroy the champions of chaos wherever they appeared on the battlefield. His heraldry was changed. The golden yellow of the Imperial fists was repainted to black, a color that symbolized his direct service to the Emperor, just as the chaplains of the Legion wore black to show their dedication to the spiritual well-being of their brothers. A reclusiarch told Sigismund not to fear this change, for Dawn himself had ordered it. The black armor marked him in the sight of the Emperor. He was no longer merely a captain of the 7th Legion. He was the Emperor's own blade, his wrath made manifest in ceramite and adamantium, and Sigismund wielded that authority with devastating effect. Across the burning ruins of Terra, through the shattered halls of the Imperial Palace and the corpse-choked streets of the surrounding districts, Sigismund strode like a figure from ancient myth. He challenged every champion of chaos he encountered to single combat, and he defeated them all. More than 24 of the traitor force's greatest warriors fell before his blade during the Siege of Terra. He cut them down one by one, these champions of the dark gods, these corrupted monsters who had once been his brothers. Each kill was an act of devotion, a prayer written in blood on the floor of the universe. Each victory was a testament to the power of faith in the face of overwhelming darkness. The traitor champions learned to fear him. The sight of that black-armored figure striding through the smoke and fire of the battlefield, and his blade already stained with the blood of their comrades, became a source of dread for the servants of chaos. Sigismund was not merely a warrior. He was a force of nature, a storm in human form, and the enemies of the Emperor broke against him like waves against a cliff. But the Siege of Terra was not won by champions alone. When Rogel Dawn accompanied the Emperor and Sanguinius aboard Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, for the final confrontation with the arch-traitor, he left most of his imperial fists behind to hold the palace, and he placed Sigismund in command of the ground forces, trusting his first captain to hold the line until his return. Sigismund held. Through the worst of the fighting, while through the darkest hours of the siege, when it seemed as though the walls would finally fall and the traitors would pour into the heart of the palace like poison into a wound, Sigismund held. He was the anchor around which the defense organized itself, the immovable point upon which the entire loyalist position depended. And when the siege finally broke, when Horus was slain and the traitor forces began their retreat into the Eye of Terror, Sigismund was still standing. But the Imperium he had fought to save was changed forever. The emperor was mortally wounded, entombed upon the golden throne in a state that was neither life nor death. Sanguinius was dead. Horus was destroyed. And the dream of a rational, secular imperium governed by reason and science died with them. In its place would grow something darker, something more desperate. A theocracy built on fear and faith and the memory of a betrayal so vast that it could never be forgiven or forgotten. And Sigismund, the warrior who had already been wrestling with questions of faith before the heresy, found in this transformed imperium a truth that aligned perfectly with his own deepest convictions. The emperor was divine. His sacrifice on the golden throne was proof of it. And the only appropriate response to that divinity was absolute, unwavering, eternal devotion. The seeds of the Black Templars had been planted. They were watered with blood and nourished by faith, and they were about to bloom into something that would terrorize the enemies of the emperor for the next 10,000 years. That's the founding, when the fists were broken and the Templars were born. The aftermath of the Horus heresy was a period of profound upheaval for the Imperium of man. The Great Traitor. Legions had been driven into the Eye of Terror during the campaign known as the Great Scouring, but the scars they left behind were deep and terrible. Entire sectors lay in ruins. Billions were dead. The institutions that had governed the Imperium during the Great Crusade were shattered, and in their place, a new order was struggling to be born. At the center of this reorganization was a single explosive question: what to do with the Space Marine legions? The legions had been the backbone of the Great Crusade, the instruments through which the Emperor had conquered the galaxy and brought humanity under a single banner. But the heresy had proven, with devastating clarity, that concentrating so much military power under the command of a single individual was a catastrophic vulnerability. Horus had controlled hundreds of thousands of Space Marines when he turned against the Emperor. His traitor legions had come within a hair's breadth of destroying everything humanity had built. The lesson was painfully obvious. The legions had to be broken apart. No single commander could ever again be allowed to wield that kind of power. The architect of this plan was Robute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, and the author of the Codex Astartes, a comprehensive treatise on military organization that would serve as the foundation for the new Imperium's armed forces. Guilliman's vision was clear. The legions would be divided into smaller units called chapters, each limited to roughly 1,000 Space Marines. These chapters would be independent, self-governing, and diverse in their tactics and traditions, ensuring that no single force could ever again threaten the Imperium from within. It was a logical plan, a rational plan, and Rogel Dawn hated it. Dawn, the Praetorian of Terror, the architect of the Imperial Palace's defenses, the Primarch who had held the line when all seemed lost, looked at Guilliman's proposal and saw not wisdom but cowardice. Where was Guilliman during the Siege of Terror? He was not there. He arrived after the fighting was done, after the blood had been spilled and the sacrifices made. And now this latecomer, this Primarch, who had not been forced to watch his father carried from the ruins of Horus's flagship more dead than alive, was going to dictate how the legions that had actually fought and bled for Terror would be organized. Dawn refused. He called Guilliman a coward, and the insult was not delivered casually. It was a Primarch's condemnation, a judgment that carried the weight of a demigod's authority. Guilliman responded in kind, accusing Dawn of heresy and disloyalty to the Emperor's vision. The other surviving Primarchs chose sides. Leman Russ of the Space Wolves and Vulcan of the Salamanders supported Dawn, unwilling to see their legions divided against their will. Jagatai Khan of the White Scars and Korax of the Raven Guard backed Guilliman, seeing the wisdom in preventing another Horus from arising. The Imperium, barely recovered from one civil war, teetered on the brink of another. It was only when the Imperial Navy fired upon an Imperial Fist's strike cruiser, the Terrible Angel, that Dawn finally relented. The shots were a wake-up call, a reminder that this disagreement had escalated beyond words and was now approaching the threshold of actual warfare between loyalist forces. Dawn was many things, stubborn and proud among them, but he was not blind. He could see that fighting Guilliman would accomplish nothing except to weaken the Imperium further, to give the remnants of the traitor legions exactly the opening they needed to strike again. And so, with a bitterness that would mark the Imperial Fists for centuries to come, Dawn agreed to divide his legion. The first successor chapters created from the Imperial Fists were the Crimson Fists and the Black Templars. And here is where the story takes its decisive turn. And because while the Crimson Fists would go on to become a relatively conventional Codex-adherent chapter, the Black Templars would become something else entirely, something that Guilliman probably did not anticipate, and almost certainly did not intend. When the Imperial Fists were divided, the most zealous, the most aggressive, the most fervently devout warriors of the Legion gravitated towards Sigismund. These were the brothers who shared his burning faith, his impatience with half measures, his conviction that the only acceptable response to the galaxy's endless threats was to meet them head-on with blade and bolter. They were the warriors who had been forged in the fires of the Siege of Terra and emerged not merely hardened, but transformed, their faith in the Emperor's divinity unshakable, and their hatred of his enemies absolute. Sigismund was named the first High Marshal of the Black Templars, a title equivalent to Chapter Master, but carrying its own distinct weight and tradition. The chapter took Sigismund's personal heraldry as their own, the black and white that he had worn as the Emperor's champion during the Siege of Terra. The black was their armor, a reminder that they served the Emperor directly, just as Sigismund had. The white was their shoulder plates, a canvas for the Maltese cross that would become the most recognizable symbol of righteous fury in the entire Imperium. And then, Sigismund did something extraordinary, something that would define the Black Templars for the next 10,000 years. He refused to take a homeworld. While other chapters settled on planets, built fortress monasteries, he established the permanent bases that would serve as their homes and recruitment grounds for millennia to come. Sigismund looked at the stars and saw not a territory to be defended, but a battlefield to be conquered. He assembled a massive war fleet, centered on the great ship that would become the Eternal Crusader, a Gloriana-class battleship of staggering size and power, and he made an oath. The oath was simple, it was absolute, and it has never been broken. Sigismund swore that upon leaving Terra, he and his chapter would prove their loyalty to the Emperor by never resting in the prosecution of their duties against his enemies. There would be no homeworld, no rest, no respite. The Black Templars would take the war to the foe, wherever and whenever the foe could be found. They would crusade across the galaxy, from one end to the other and back again, bringing the Emperor's wrath to every heretic, every Xenos, every witch and mutant who dared to exist in defiance of his divine will. This was not merely a military strategy, it was a statement of faith, a declaration that the Black Templars' entire existence would be an act of worship, a never-ending prayer spoken in the language of battle. Every world they conquered would be a hymn to the Emperor's glory. Every enemy they destroyed would be an offering laid at the foot of the Golden Throne. Every drop of blood they spilled, whether the enemy's or their own, would be a testament to the power of devotion in a universe that seemed designed to crush it. The other Imperial Fist's successors watched Sigismund go with mixed emotions. Some thought him mad, and others thought him the truest expression of Dawn's legacy, the distilled essence of everything the Imperial Fists had been meant to be. Dawn himself is said to have known his son's heart well, for the Primarch granted Sigismund the Eternal Crusader, understanding that his most zealous captain could never be content to sit behind walls and wait for the enemy to come. And so, the Black Templars set forth upon the Eternal Crusade. 10,000 years ago, They left Terra's orbit with their oaths ringing in the void, and they have never come back. Not permanently, not to stay. They have returned to Terra on occasion, for ceremonies or councils, or the rare moments when the Imperium's need was so great that even the wandering crusaders had to be called to the center. But they have never settled, they have never stopped. The Eternal Crusade continues to this day, the longest Space Marine campaign in the history of the Imperium, and there is no sign that it will ever end. Because for the Black Templars, the Crusade is not a campaign with a defined beginning and end. It is their reason for existing. It is their identity, their culture, their religion. Take it away, and they cease to be what they are. They become just another chapter, just another collection of gene-enhanced warriors fighting an endless war. But with the Crusade, they are something more. They are the Emperor's sword, unsheathed and swinging, and the galaxy will tremble before them until the last Black Templar draws his final breath. Sigismund understood this instinctively. He had seen the future of the Imperium, not through any psychic power or prophetic vision, but through the cold, as clear lens of a warrior's pragmatism. During the Great Crusade, long before the heresy had shattered the Imperium's dreams, Sigismund had shared his private thoughts with Captain Tarik Torgadon of the Lunar Wolves. His words were prophetic in their bleak accuracy. Humanity would spend its life fighting to secure the Imperium, and then spend the rest of its days fighting to keep it intact. In the far future, there would be only war. Sigismund accepted that truth. He embraced it, and he built a chapter that was designed, from the ground up, to thrive in a galaxy where war was not an interruption of normal life, but the very substance of it. The Black Templars did not simply leave Terra and begin fighting. They left Terra and began a transformation. It a deliberate and systematic divergence from the norms that Guilliman had laid down in his Codex Astartes. Sigismund had no use for the Codex. He saw it as an insult to the teachings of his own Primarch, a set of constraints imposed by a Primarch who had not been there when it mattered most. The Black Templars would follow their own path, guided by their own traditions and their own interpretation of the Emperor's will. Instead of organizing themselves into the rigid company structure prescribed by the Codex, the Black Templars adopted a fluid, crusade-based system. Rather than 10 companies of roughly 100 warriors each, the chapter divided itself into multiple independent crusade fleets, each led by a marshal and composed of whatever forces were needed for the mission at hand. Some crusades were small, as just a handful of squads pursuing a specific objective. Others were massive, containing hundreds or even thousands of warriors supported by entire fleets of warships. Instead of maintaining a single chapter homeworld, the Black Templars established chapter keeps on the worlds they conquered or liberated. These keeps served as recruitment stations, staging areas, and supply depots, but they were not homes. They were forward operating bases, waypoints on an infinite journey. The Black Templars might garrison a keep for a time, leave it in the hands of a castellan and a small force of warriors, and then move on to the next battle, the next world, the next enemy that needed destroying. And instead of accepting the Codex's limitation of roughly 1,000 warriors per chapter, the Black Templars simply did not bother counting. Or rather, yes, they counted, but they kept the number known only to the High Marshal himself. The true strength of the chapter has been a subject of speculation and concern for millennia. Estimates have ranged from 5,000 to 6,000 active warriors, and some have suggested that the number might be even higher. The Inquisition has expressed its displeasure on more than one occasion, but the Black Templars have never shown any inclination to bring themselves into compliance. After all, who is going to tell them to stop? The Black Templars are not merely a chapter of Space Marines. They are a force of nature, a crusading army that has been gathering momentum for 10,000 years. Asking them to limit their numbers is like asking a hurricane to slow down. It is theoretically possible, but practically speaking, then no one has the authority or the firepower to make it happen. This was Sigismund's vision. A chapter unbound by convention, driven by faith, shaped by war, and answerable ultimately to no one except the Emperor himself. It was audacious, it was controversial, and it worked. For the first centuries of the Eternal Crusade, Sigismund led his Black Templars through one campaign after another, purging the remnants of the traitor forces wherever they could be found. During the Great Scouring, the Black Templars were among the most active and aggressive of the Loyalist forces, hunting down traitors with a fury that bordered on obsession. A force of Night Lords who refused to retreat into the Eye of Terror, choosing instead to fight a rearguard action to buy time for their fleeing brothers. War was destroyed utterly by the Black Templars in the Donatello system, one of the final campaigns of the Scouring. But Sigismund's attention was focused elsewhere. He was watching the Eye of Terror, waiting, because he knew, with the absolute certainty of a man whose faith had been proven right too many times to doubt, that the traitors would return. Horus was dead, yes, but the forces that had corrupted him, the Chaos Gods who had whispered promises of power and glory into the War Master's ear, were not dead. They were eternal, they were patient, and they had servants who, unlike their mortal followers, did not age or weaken with the passage of time. Sigismund positioned his fleet near the Cadian Gate, the narrow passage of stable real space that provided the primary route between the Eye of Terror and the rest of the galaxy. He maintained his vigil there for centuries, watching and waiting, while Imperial officials dismissed his concerns as the paranoia of an old warrior who had seen too much war. The traitors were beaten, they said. The heresy was over. The Imperium had more pressing concerns than watching a hole in space that had been quiet for hundreds of years. They were wrong. Sigismund was right, and the proof would come in blood and fire, as it so often does. The last stand of Sigismund, fire, at the Cadian Gate. By the time the First Black Crusade began, Sigismund was old. Not old by the standards of normal men, whose lives are measured in decades, but old even by the standards of a space marine, whose enhanced biology grants them centuries of life. Sigismund had been alive for over 1,000 years, and those years had been filled with a relentless pace of warfare that would have ground lesser warriors to dust. His body bore the scars of 1,000 battles. His armor was dented and scored by weapons from every corner of the galaxy. But his spirit, that burning core of faith and duty that had driven him since the refugee camps of the Jonas Plateau, was as fierce as ever. He had spent those centuries watching the Cadian Gate, maintaining his vigil with the patience of a saint and the stubbornness of a stone. His brothers had fought and died beside him. New generations of Black Templars had been recruited, trained, and blooded on the world surrounding the Eye of Terror. The chapter had grown and changed around its founder, but Sigismund himself remained a constant, an anchor of faith in a sea of uncertainty. And then, just as he had always warned, the Eye of Terror opened and vomited forth the largest chaos force the galaxy had seen since the heresy itself. Ezekiel Abaddon, once the first captain of the Sons of Horus, now the self-proclaimed War Master of Chaos and Lord of the Black Legion, led his forces out of the warp and into real space at the head of a fleet that darkened the stars. The First Black Crusade had begun, and its objective was nothing less than the destruction of everything the Imperium had built in the Millennium since Horus's defeat. Sigismund's fleet was waiting. The Black Templars had been preparing for this moment for centuries, and when the Chaos Fleet emerged from the Eye of Terror, they met it with everything they had. The Void Battle was savage beyond description. Our warships the size of cities, trading broadsides at ranges where the flash of weapons fire illuminated the darkness like artificial suns. The Black Templars fought with the desperate ferocity of warriors who had been vindicated, who had been proven right after centuries of being dismissed and doubted. Every shell they fired was a validation. Every enemy vessel they destroyed was proof that their vigil had not been in vain. But the Black Templars were outnumbered, badly. The Black Legion's fleet was vastly larger than anything Sigismund could muster, and for all their skill and fury, the Templars were slowly being overwhelmed. The battle raged through the void around the Cadian Gate, and with each passing hour, the Chaos forces pressed their advantage. Abaddon himself led the boarding action against the Eternal Crusader, at the Warmaster of Chaos, wielding the Talon of Horus, the weapon that had killed the Primarch Sanguinius and mortally wounded the Emperor, cut his way through the Black Templars' flagship with a force of Black Legion Terminators at his back. He was coming for Sigismund. He knew the High Marshal was there, knew that this ancient warrior was the last living link to the Siege of Terror, the last enemy who could truly understand what the heresy had cost both sides. And Abaddon wanted to end that link personally. They met in the heart of the Eternal Crusader, surrounded by the wreckage of fallen warriors from both sides. The Sword Brethren of the Black Templars and the elite of the Black Legion formed a ring around their leaders, a human arena of power armor and hatred, and then the champions faced each other. The duel between Sigismund and Abaddon is one of the most legendary confrontations in the history of the Imperium.
Now, I want to take a quick second here just to share a personal thought before we keep going. Out of every single chapter in this setting, the Black Templars are the ones that genuinely feel like they belong in this universe more than anyone else. Like, most chapters have this quiet nobility thing going on, this restrained professionalism, and that's cool. But the Templars, they looked at a galaxy that runs on misery and madness and said, yeah, we're going to match that energy. There's something weirdly honest about them. They don't pretend the darkness is manageable. They don't play politics. They just chain a sword to their hand and walk toward whatever's trying to kill everyone. And I think that's why so many of us are drawn to them. Not because they're right about everything, but because they're definitely not. But because in a setting full of compromises and half measures, they refuse to be anything other than exactly what they are. But anyways, let's get back to the video.
Here was Sigismund, over 1,000 years old, his body worn by centuries of combat, facing a foe who had been sustained by the timeless energies of the warp and who wielded one of the most powerful weapons in existence. By any rational assessment, Sigismund should not have stood a chance. Abaddon was stronger, faster, and better equipped. The Talon of Horus alone was enough to tip the scales decisively in the Warmaster's favor. But Sigismund did not fight with rational assessment. He fought with faith. And faith, as the Black Templars would prove time and again over the next 10 millennia, is a weapon that defies rational assessment. The duel was ferocious and closely fought. Sigismund matched Abaddon blow for blow, his ancient blade singing through the air with a precision that spoke of centuries of practice and a lifetime of devotion. The Warmaster's attacks were powerful, driven by the dark energies of chaos and the rage of a warrior who had spent 1,000 years in the Eye of Terror, nursing his hatred. But Sigismund met them with a calm that belied the violence of the exchange, a serenity born of absolute conviction in his cause. Before the duel began, there was a moment that would be remembered in the annals of the Black Templars forever. Abaddon, in an unexpected gesture, did not immediately draw his weapons. Instead, he spoke to Sigismund with what could only be described as kindness, the respect of one old warrior for another. He offered an impassioned plea for Sigismund to open his eyes, to join the traitor cause, to accept that the Imperium rightfully belonged to the Space Marine legions, who had bled and died to build it during the Great Crusade. It was, perhaps, the last honest gesture Abaddon would ever make toward an enemy. Sigismund's response was immediate and absolute. By beginning the heresy and nearly destroying the Imperium, Abaddon and his fellow traitors had proven that they did not care for the empire they had built. They were oath-breakers. They were traitors. And the only appropriate response to treachery was the sword. They fought. And in the end, Sigismund fell. But he did not fall quietly. In the final moments of the duel, as Abaddon's killing blow descended, Sigismund saw an opening. A deliberate choice, perhaps, to bait the Warmaster into overextending, to trade his own life for a wound that would mark the despoiler forever. And Sigismund drove his black sword deep into Abaddon's chest, burying the blade to the hilt in the Warmaster's corrupted flesh. The scar it left would remain with Abaddon for the next 10,000 years, a permanent reminder of the old warrior who had come within a breath of ending the Black Crusades before they had even truly begun. As Sigismund lay dying, his lifeblood pooling on the deck of the flagship he had commanded for a millennium. He spoke his final words to his killer. And those words were not a plea for mercy, not a curse of vengeance, but a prophecy delivered with the calm certainty of a man who could see the future stretching out before him like a road through the darkness. "You will die as your weakling father died," Sigismund told Abaddon. Soulless, honorless, weeping, ashamed. The words hit Abaddon harder than any blade could have. They were a condemnation, a judgment rendered by a dying saint upon the leader of the damned. And whether Abaddon believed them or not, he could not simply dismiss them. They echoed in his mind as he withdrew from the Eternal Crusader, his forces pulling back to tend to their wounded warmaster and face the other threats that were closing in on the Chaos Fleet. The Black Templars were defeated in this engagement. Their fleet was battered, their flagship damaged, their High Marshal dead. But the Black Legion had not achieved its objectives either. The Cadian Gate held. The Black Crusade would eventually peter out, and the forces of chaos would withdraw back into the Eye of Terror, leaving behind a galaxy that was shaken but not broken. And the Black Templars had something far more valuable than victory. They had a martyrdom. Sigismund's death transformed him from a legendary warrior into a sacred figure. He became the founding saint of the Black Templars, the exemplar against whom all future High Marshals would be measured. His oath, the oath of eternal crusade that he had sworn upon leaving Terra, was renewed by his successor, and by every High Marshal who has followed since. The Eternal Crusade did not end with Sigismund's death. It intensified. His martyrdom added fuel to the fire that burned in the hearts of every Black Templar, a fire that had been burning since the Siege of Terra and that would never be extinguished. The practice of naming an emperor's champion, which Sigismund had originated during the Siege of Terra, became enshrined as one of the chapter's most sacred traditions. On the eve of battle, a Black Templar would be gripped by visions, divine revelations sent by the Emperor himself, showing the warrior scenes from the ancient past, the Siege of Terra, the duels with Chaos champions, the burning skies and blood-soaked streets of a war that had happened 10,000 years ago, but that felt as real and as present as the battle that was about to begin. When a warrior experienced these visions, he reported them to the chapter's chaplains, who would recognize the divine calling for what it was. The warrior would be anointed as the Emperor's champion, armored in the armor of faith and armed with the black sword, ancient relics that carried the weight of millennia of sacred warfare. Yes, and then he would stride into battle with a single purpose: to seek out the enemy's greatest champion and destroy them in single combat, just as Sigismund had done on the walls of the Imperial Palace all those thousands of years ago. It is written in the holy texts of the Black Templars that when a battle brother receives these divine visions, it is the memories of Sigismund himself that he sees. A shifting vista of warring angels and vengeful gods, a glimpse of the war for Terra as seen through the eyes of the greatest champion the Imperium has ever known. Only those who have become the Emperor's champion and survived can hope to understand the weight of Sigismund's duty and the terrible glory of his sacrifice. The death of Sigismund was not an ending. It was a beginning. It was the moment when the Black Templars ceased to be merely a chapter of Space Marines and became something approaching a religious order, a brotherhood of warrior monks bound together by oaths of such ferocity and devotion that even the gods of chaos think twice before testing their resolve. Sigismund's legacy is not merely the chapter he founded. It is the idea he embodied, the conviction that faith is the greatest weapon in the arsenal of the righteous, and that duty is not a burden to be endured, but a privilege to be cherished. 10,000 years after his death, the Black Templars still fight in his name. They still swear his oath. They still carry his sword. And they will continue to do so until the last star burns out and the galaxy falls silent. Because the Eternal Crusade has no end. It was never meant to. It is a promise made to the Emperor by a man who understood, better than anyone, what it meant to serve something greater than yourself. And the Black Templars keep their promises, always. Most Space Marine chapters, when you look at them closely, are defined by the world they call home. The Space Wolves have Fenris, that frozen death world where the aurora borealis dances over ice fields that stretch to the horizon, and the wolves that give the chapter its name howl at moons that hang in skies perpetually threatening a blizzard. The Ultramarines have Macragge, a civilized world of marble columns and ordered governance that reflects the precise, disciplined nature of its defenders. The Blood Angels have Baal, a radiation-scorched desert where the trials of recruitment are as merciless as the chapter's hidden curse. The Black Templars have nothing, and they prefer it that way. Where other chapters build fortresses, the Black Templars build fleets. Where other chapters plant their banner in the soil of a world and say, "This is ours, this is where we belong," the Black Templars plant their banner on the prow of a warship and point it at the nearest enemy. Their home is the void between stars. Their fortress is the hull of whatever vessel carries them to the next fight. Their hearth is the dim, flickering light of chapel candles aboard battle barges that have not seen a space dock in decades. The heart of the Black Templars, the closest thing they have to a fortress monastery, is the Eternal Crusader. This vessel is not merely a ship. It is a monument, a cathedral, a self-contained world of war and worship that has been sailing the void for 10,000 years, carrying the sacred relics and holy traditions of the chapter from one end of the galaxy to the other. The Eternal Crusader is a Gloriana-class battleship, one of the largest and most powerful warships ever constructed by human hands. It was given to Sigismund by Rogel Dawn himself after the Second Founding, and it has served as the flagship of every High Marshal since. Over the millennia, it has been expanded and refitted countless times, each generation of tech marines adding new docking facilities, additional launch bays for Thunderhawk gunships and shuttles, and accommodation for twice as many space marines as a normal battle barge could hold. The ship is enormous, a floating citadel that contains chapels, reliquaries, training halls, armories, and the sacred chamber of the First Proclamation, also known as Sigismund's Hall, where Rogel Dawn formally recognized the Black Templars as a chapter in the aftermath of the Second Founding. The Eternal Crusader is where the High Marshal resides, traveling from crusade to crusade, lending his military genius and his spiritual authority wherever it is needed most. It is where the chapter's most sacred relics are kept, artifacts that date back to the founding and beyond, touched by the hands of Sigismund himself and sanctified by 10 millennia of prayer and devotion. It is, in every meaningful sense, the soul of the Black Templars made manifest in adamantium and void shields. But the Eternal Crusader is only one ship in a vast fleet. The Black Templars maintain dozens of crusade fleets, and each one a self-contained fighting force capable of operating independently for years or even decades at a time. These fleets vary enormously in size and composition. Some consist of just a handful of warships carrying a few dozen warriors on a specific mission. Others are massive armadas of battle barges, strike cruisers, training vessels, and gigantic forge ships, where all of the chapter's war gear, vehicles, and materiel are manufactured and maintained. Each crusade fleet is led by a marshal, the Black Templars' equivalent of a captain in a codex-compliant chapter. The marshals are experienced warriors chosen from among the Sword Brethren through ritual combat, their appointment confirmed by the High Marshal himself. Only once in the entire history of the chapter has a High Marshal withheld his approval of a marshal's appointment, or during the Gervart repeal of the 36th Millennium, and even that refusal is more legend than documented fact. The marshals have enormous autonomy. They command their crusades without the need for constant approval from the High Marshal, making tactical and strategic decisions on the fly as the demands of their campaign require. This decentralized command structure is one of the Black Templars' greatest strengths, and one of the things that makes them so difficult for their enemies to predict or counter. There is no single point of failure in the Black Templars' organization. Destroying one crusade fleet does not cripple the chapter. It just makes the survivors angrier. Below the marshals are the castellans, who command the individual fighting companies that make up each crusade. Or a castellan is roughly equivalent to a lieutenant in other chapters, though the Black Templars would bristle at the comparison. Castellans are also responsible for the chapter keeps, the fortified outposts that the Black Templars establish on the worlds they conquer or liberate. These chapter keeps serve multiple purposes. They are recruitment centers, drawing aspiring warriors from the local population and subjecting them to the brutal selection process that might, if they survive, see them transformed into Space Marines. They are staging posts, providing a base of operations for crusade fleets operating in the area. And they are watchtowers, keeping vigil over the worlds the Black Templars have claimed for the Emperor, ready to call for reinforcements if a new threat emerges. The keeps are not small installations. They are sizable fortifications, capable of accommodating 2 to 3 fighting companies of Space Marines, with armories, chapels, training facilities, and the infrastructure necessary to support extended operations. Over the millennia, hundreds of chapter keeps have been established across the galaxy. Some still stand, maintained by small garrisons of Black Templars who watch over their assigned worlds with the patience of saints. Others have fallen into ruin, abandoned when the crusade moved on and never reclaimed. And some have been overrun by enemies who were foolish enough to test the fortifications of a chapter that was founded by the sons of Rogel Dawn, the greatest fortress builder the Imperium has ever known. The worlds that host Black Templars chapter keeps are scattered across the galaxy. Barbarossa 4 is an agri-world where a chapter citadel stands in the northern wastes. Stygia 12, a forge world that hosts a keep called Mongizard. Dawn's Darkness, a death world where the very environment serves as the first test for aspiring recruits. These are just a few of the known locations, and there are many more that remain classified, known only to the High Marshal and his most trusted advisors. The fleet-based nature of the Black Templars means that the chapter is rarely, if ever, assembled in one place. The various crusade fleets are scattered across the galaxy, fighting their own wars, pursuing their own objectives, and recruiting their own warriors. Communication between crusades is maintained through astropathic relays and occasional physical meetings when crusade fleets cross paths in the void, but for the most part, each crusade operates as an autonomous unit, a miniature chapter within the greater whole. This organizational structure has profound implications for the Black Templars' identity and culture. Unlike a codex-compliant chapter, where all the warriors share a common homeworld, common training, and common traditions, the Black Templars develop local variations in their customs and practices based on the worlds they recruit from and the enemies they fight. A crusade operating in the xenophobic sectors near the Eye of Terror might develop different tactical doctrines than one fighting Tyranids in the Eastern Fringe. A keep on a feudal world might produce warriors with a very different cultural background than a keep on a hive world. But despite this diversity, certain things remain constant across all crusades and all keeps. The oath of eternal crusade, the worship of the Emperor as a divine being, the preference for close combat over ranged warfare, the practice of naming an emperor's champion on the eve of battle, the tradition of devotion chains, and above all, the burning, relentless, never-ending desire to destroy the enemies of the Emperor, wherever they may be found, and in whatever form they may take. The Black Templars are, in many ways, the most independent force in the Imperium. The High Marshal answers to no one except the Emperor himself. He does not need the approval of the High Lords of Terror to launch a crusade. He does not need the permission of the Inquisition to deploy his forces. He does not need to justify his decisions to any mortal authority. Yes, because the Black Templars' authority derives not from political appointment or institutional rank, but from the oath sworn by Sigismund 10,000 years ago. That oath supersedes all other considerations. It is older than most of the Imperium's institutions. It is more enduring than most of its laws. And it is enforced by a chapter of Space Marines who, on a bad day, can muster more warriors than some entire sectors can field. This independence makes the Black Templars both invaluable and uncomfortable for the rest of the Imperium. Invaluable because they are always available, always ready to fight, always willing to throw themselves into the most desperate battles without hesitation. Uncomfortable because they are answerable to no one, because their numbers exceed what the Codex Astartes allows, and because their fervent religious devotion sometimes leads them to actions that more restrained chapters would consider excessive. But the Black Templars have never cared about comfort. Comfort is for the weak. Comfort is for those who have forgotten that the galaxy is a hostile place, that the Emperor's enemies never rest, and that the price of vigilance is eternal war. And speaking of eternal war, let us talk about how the Black Templars actually fight it. Warriors of faith, the ranks, the vows, and the way of the blade. The Black Templars do not merely disagree with the Codex Astartes. They ignore it with a determination that borders on contempt. Rabut Gilliman wrote the Codex as a comprehensive guide to Space Marine warfare, organization, and culture. He intended it to be the foundation upon which all chapters would build their traditions. Sigismund looked at it, decided it was an insult to his Primarch's teachings, and threw it in the metaphorical trash. And his successors have followed that example with enthusiasm. The result is a chapter that is organized, motivated, and equipped in ways that are fundamentally different from the Codex standard. Understanding these differences is essential to understanding what makes the Black Templars the fearsome warriors they are. Let us start with the ranks. In a standard Codex chapter, a newly created Space Marine goes through a progression of roles. He begins as a scout, serving in the 10th Company, where he learns the basics of warfare while wearing lighter armor and carrying simpler weapons. He then advances through the various companies, serving as a Devastator, then an Assault Marine, then a Tactical Marine, before eventually earning a place in the elite 1st Company as a veteran. It is a structured, orderly progression that ensures every Marine gains experience in all aspects of warfare before being entrusted with the chapter's most sacred war gear. The Black Templars look at this system and laugh, not out loud because they are far too grim for that, but the disdain is palpable. In the Black Templars, a newly created Space Marine is called a neophyte, and unlike in other chapters, a Black Templar's neophyte is not tucked away in a scout company where he can learn his trade in relative safety. He is thrown directly into the front lines of the crusade, assigned to a full initiate who serves as his mentor, his teacher, and his master. The neophyte fights alongside his initiate in full-scale engagements, facing the same enemies and enduring the same horrors as the veteran warriors around him. He learns the art of war not from textbooks or training simulations, but from the crucible of actual combat. This approach to training is brutal, unforgiving, and spectacularly effective. The neophytes who survive their apprenticeship emerge as some of the most capable warriors in the Imperium, tempered by a baptism of fire that leaves them harder and sharper than any amount of controlled training could achieve. Those who do not survive, well, the Black Templars recruit aggressively from every world they visit, so there are always more aspirants waiting to take the fallen neophyte's place. But before a youth even reaches the status of neophyte, they must first become an expectanten. This is a term unique to the Black Templars, referring to those who have declared their intent to join the chapter and are willing to undertake the dangerous journey to a chapter keep. Many Imperial citizens on worlds where the Black Templars have established keeps aspire to join their ranks, and they hone their skills in preparation, training their bodies and their minds for the trials ahead. Even those who ultimately fail to become neophytes often channel their martial preparation into careers in the Imperial Guard or planetary defense forces, making the worlds around Black Templars keeps notably more militarized than average. The journey to a chapter keep is itself a test. Depending on the world, an aspiring recruit might have to cross hostile wilderness, survive environmental hazards, or fight their way through the dangerous zones that surround many keeps. Only those who reach the keep alive are considered for the next phase of selection, and the trials that follow are among the most intense in the Adeptus Astartes. Aspirants are forced to fight each other, navigate trap-filled courses in complete darkness, and endure ordeals that would break lesser men. One of the most infamous trials involves plunging an arm into a blazing fire while reciting scripture from memory. The purpose is not merely to test physical endurance, but to assess the aspirant's faith and mental fortitude. A warrior who can recite the emperor's words while his flesh burns is a warrior whose devotion is beyond question. Once a neophyte has proven himself through months or years of combat alongside his mentor, he earns the rank of initiate. As this is the backbone of the Black Templars, the rank held by the majority of the chapter's battle brothers. Unlike in other chapters, where the equivalent rank is a stepping stone to higher positions, many Black Templars remain initiates for decades or even centuries. The chapter does not view this as stagnation. Rather, it reflects the belief that every initiate walks his own path, and only he and the Emperor may determine how he wields his skills in defense of mankind. As an initiate gains experience and proves his valor, he may be granted the honor of taking a neophyte of his own, beginning the cycle anew. This creates a powerful bond between mentor and student, a relationship that often persists even after the neophyte has earned his own initiate status. These bonds of brotherhood form the connective tissue of the Black Templars, and a web of loyalty and shared experience that holds the chapter together across the vast distances of the galaxy. The most accomplished initiates, those who have demonstrated exceptional skill and valor over many campaigns, are eventually elevated to the Sword Brethren. This is the elite of the Black Templars, roughly equivalent to the first company veterans of a Codex chapter, but with a character all their own. The Sword Brethren are the Marshal's household, his inner circle of trusted warriors, the ones he turns to when the fighting is at its most desperate and the stakes are at their highest. Sword Brethren are released from the obligation of training neophytes, freeing them to focus entirely on their role as the chapter's premier warriors. They receive additional training, particularly in the use of tactical dreadnought armor, unknown as Terminator armor, and they are given access to the chapter's most sacred and powerful war gear. In battle, the Sword Brethren are always found at the point of greatest danger, their blades singing and their bolters thundering as they cut a path through the enemy's strongest positions. They wear cream-colored cloaks and display red trim on their black shoulder plates, marks of honor that distinguish them from the rank-and-file initiates. When a crusade needs a new marshal, the candidate is chosen from among the Sword Brethren through ritual combat. The aspirants face each other in ceremonial duels, testing their skill and their will against their peers until a winner emerges. The High Marshal then confirms the appointment, and the new Marshal is given command of a crusade fleet and sent forth to continue the Eternal Crusade. Thus, there is one more rank within the Black Templars that deserves special attention, because it is perhaps the most iconic and the most spiritually significant of all, the Emperor's Champion. We have already discussed the origin of this tradition, how Sigismund was named the first Emperor's Champion during the Siege of Terra, and how the practice was carried forward into the Black Templars. But the way the Emperor's Champion is selected in the modern Black Templars is worth exploring in detail, because it illustrates the depth of the chapter's faith and the intensity of their spiritual life. On the eve of battle, the Black Templars gather in the chapels of their warships for prayer and meditation. They cleanse their weapons and their souls, preparing themselves for the violence to come. And during this time of contemplation, one warrior, unpredictable and unchosen by any mortal authority, will be gripped by visions. His eyes will glaze over, his body will go rigid, and he will see things that no other mortal can see. He will witness the Siege of Terra as if he were standing on the walls of the Imperial Palace. He will see the champions of chaos advancing through the smoke and fire. And he will see Sigismund, the first champion, striding out to meet them with his black sword in hand and the Emperor's light burning in his eyes. When the visions pass, the warrior reports what he has seen to the chapter's chaplains. They recognize the divine calling immediately, for it has happened 1,000 times before and will happen 1,000 times again. The warrior is anointed with sacred oils. He is armored in the armor of faith, as an ancient suit of artificer plate that has been passed down through generations of champions, and he is given the black sword, a weapon of such power and significance that its very presence on the battlefield is enough to inspire the Black Templars to feats of extraordinary valor. The Emperor's champion then leads his brothers into battle with a singular purpose: to seek out and destroy the enemy's greatest warrior in single combat. He does not fight in formation. He does not follow tactical plans or obey strategic directives. He is a lone wolf in a pack of crusaders, a divine instrument pointed at the heart of the enemy and released without restraint. His death in battle is considered a bad omen, and every effort is made to recover his body, his weapon, and his armor if he falls. But his survival is considered a miracle, and a sign that the Emperor's favor rests upon the crusade and that victory is assured. The vows that the Black Templars swear before battle are another element that sets them apart from other chapters. Before an engagement, the Emperor's champion leads the assembled warriors in renewing one of 4 sacred oaths. These vows serve as a focus for the Crusade's fury, channeling the collective rage and devotion of the Black Templars into a specific aspect of their duties. The first vow is, "Suffer not the unclean to live," a declaration of the Black Templars' intent to purge the battlefield of all who are tainted by corruption or mutation. The second is, "Uphold the honor of the Emperor," a vow to fight with such distinction and valor that the Emperor himself would be proud. The third is, "Abhor the witch," or "Destroy the witch," a visceral expression of the chapter's hatred of psychers and all who traffic in the sorcerous arts. And the fourth is, "Accept any challenge, no matter the odds," a promise that no Black Templar will back down from a fight, regardless of how desperate the situation might seem. These vows are not mere ritual. They are taken with absolute sincerity and enforced with absolute rigor. A Black Templar who swears to accept any challenge does not retreat. Period. A Black Templar who vows to suffer not the unclean to live does not show mercy to the tainted. Period. The vows are binding, sacred, and inviolable, and they turn an already formidable fighting force into something that borders on unstoppable. The devotion chains are perhaps the most visually distinctive element of the Black Templars' warrior culture. Before battle, most Black Templars use heavy chains to bind their weapons to their gauntlets, physically linking their hands to their swords, axes, or other close combat weapons. The chains are not removed until victory is achieved. This tradition dates back to the Great Crusade era, when the practice of chaining weapons to wrists originated with the World Eaters Legion and spread to other legions, including the Imperial Fists. Sigismund took to the custom with his characteristic zeal, binding his knightly weapons with dense black chains, and the practice became one of the defining traditions of the chapter he founded. There are different types of chains with different significance. Devotion. Chains are the most common, bound before battle and removed after victory. They are a visible expression of the warrior's commitment to the fight, a declaration that he will not let go of his weapon until the enemy is destroyed. Chains of zeal are more serious. Unlike devotion chains, which are temporary, chains of zeal are permanently welded to weapon and armor. The warrior who bears a chain of zeal must keep his gauntlet on and his weapon in hand at all times, never removing them for the rest of his service. It is a commitment of astonishing intensity, a voluntary enslavement to the act of warfare that only the most devoted Black Templars undertake. The combat doctrine of the Black Templars reflects all of these cultural elements. The chapter favors close combat above all other forms of warfare. While they are perfectly capable of fighting at range, with bolters and heavy weapons and all the other tools in the Space Marine arsenal. The Black Templars believe that true honor is found in the press of melee, where a warrior can look his enemy in the eye and see the fear dawning there as the black sword descends. This preference for close combat is not merely cultural, it is tactical. The Black Templars have refined the art of the close assault to a level of devastating efficiency. Their Crusader squads, composed of mixed formations of initiates and neophytes, are trained to close with the enemy as rapidly as possible, crossing the killing ground between the two forces with a speed and aggression that gives the enemy no time to bring their firepower to bear. The Land Raider Crusader, a variant of the iconic Space Marine transport, specifically designed by the Black Templars, was created to support this doctrine. And it carries a larger payload of warriors than the standard Land Raider and is equipped with hurricane bolters that can suppress enemy positions while the assault force disembarks directly into the melee. When the Black Templars charge, they do not simply run toward the enemy. They advance with purpose and precision, their chaplains leading them in battle hymns and prayers that build in intensity as they close the distance. The sound of thousands of armored boots striking the ground in unison, the rising crescendo of voices raised in devotional fury, the flash of chainswords revving to full speed and power weapons crackling with lethal energy. These things are enough to break the morale of all but the most determined defenders before a single blow is struck. And when the Templars reach the enemy line, the violence is absolute. But the Sword Brethren cut through the strongest defenses like a hot knife through wax. The initiates smash into the enemy ranks with the unstoppable momentum of warriors who have sworn on their souls that they will not retreat. The neophytes, fighting beside their mentors for the first time, discover whether they have what it takes to be Black Templars in the most unforgiving classroom the galaxy has to offer. The losses are often terrible. The Black Templars' aggressive doctrine means that they frequently take casualties that more cautious chapters would consider unacceptable. But the chapter's decentralized recruiting system, which draws new warriors from dozens of worlds across the galaxy, ensures that losses are replaced quickly. And the warriors who survive, as the ones who walk out of the smoking ruins with blood on their blades and prayers on their lips, are some of the hardest, most capable fighters in the Imperium. There is one more aspect of the Black Templars' way of war that deserves mention, and it is perhaps the most counterintuitive. For all their reputation as mindless berserkers who charge headlong into the enemy without regard for tactics or strategy, the Black Templars' command structure is actually quite sophisticated. The marshals and high marshals do not typically lead from the front lines. Instead, they stay back, assessing the battlefield and advising their subordinates through communications systems, directing the various squads to strike at the most advantageous points and withdraw when necessary. The irony of this is not lost on observers, and a chapter that is famous for its zealous charges and suicidal last stands is actually led by commanders who employ careful, methodical tactics. The rage and fury are real, but they are channeled and directed by cool heads who understand that zealotry is most effective when it is aimed at the right target at the right time. High Marshal Helbrecht himself never touched down on the surface of Armageddon during the Third War. He stayed in orbit, commanding the naval battle with an expertise and tactical acumen that impressed even the Imperial Navy admirals who fought alongside him. This combination of strategic intelligence and tactical ferocity is what makes the Black Templars so dangerous. They are not simply angry, they are focused. Their fury is not blind, it is aimed, and when it hits, and when? Well, it hits with the force of 10,000 years of accumulated hatred and devotion. Abhor the witch, faith as shield and sword. There is a phrase that echoes through the halls of every Black Templar's warship, whispered in the chapels during prayer and screamed on the battlefield during the heat of combat. It is 3 words, simple and brutal, that encapsulate one of the most controversial aspects of the chapter's identity. Abhor the witch. The Black Templars' relationship with psychers is one of the most complex and misunderstood elements of their lore. To outsiders, it appears straightforward. The Black Templars hate psychers. They do not employ librarians. They do not use psychic powers in combat. They view the witch, the mutant, and the sorcerer as abominations to be purged with bolter and blade. End of story. But the reality, and as is so often the case in the grim darkness of the far future, is more nuanced than it appears. The Black Templars do not employ librarians. This is true. They are one of the very few Space Marine chapters that completely lack a librarius, the psychic division that most chapters rely on for battlefield intelligence, counter-sorcery, and direct psychic attack. The absence is so total and so complete that the chapter's own records do not fully explain why it exists. There are several theories. The most widely accepted is that the Black Templars lost their librarians during a psychic catastrophe known as the Howling, a cataclysmic event that sent a wave of psychic energy across the galaxy and killed or incapacitated untold numbers of psychers. The Black Templars' librarians, already a small group in a chapter that was never comfortable with psychic powers, were wiped out entirely. And because the librarius normally maintains a chapter's historical records, the institutional knowledge of how and why the librarians were lost was itself lost, creating a gap in the chapter's understanding of its own history. Another theory holds that the Black Templars still enforce the Edict of Nicaea, the Emperor's original decree during the Great Crusade that banned the use of psychic powers among the Legiones Astartes. While most chapters eventually relaxed this prohibition, the Black Templars, with their strict interpretation of the Emperor's will and their deep suspicion of anything that smells of the warp, continued to enforce it long after everyone else had moved on. A third, a more speculative theory suggests that the Black Templars' intense hatred of psychers might actually have a practical effect in the warp-influenced universe of the 41st millennium. Rogel Dawn was known for rejecting chaos so strongly that basic demons were incapable of existing in his presence. Is it possible that the collective faith and loathing of an entire chapter of his genetic descendants could suppress psychic ability among their own ranks? That the Black Templars' hatred of the witch is so intense, so deeply embedded in their spiritual and genetic makeup, that it literally prevents psychers from manifesting among their number? It is an intriguing possibility, and one that the Black Templars themselves would probably endorse. And because it aligns with their fundamental belief that the Emperor's will is the ultimate force in the universe and that faith is the most powerful weapon against the predations of the warp. But here is where the nuance comes in. The Black Templars do not hate all psychers. They hate certain kinds of psychers, and they revere others. Astropaths, the psychically gifted humans who provide the Imperium with its long-range communication capability, are treated with special reverence by the Black Templars. The chapter sees astropaths as holy disciples who have actually communed with the Emperor, having undergone the soul-binding process that links their psychic abilities to the Emperor's own power. To the Black Templars, astropaths are not witches. They are saints, blessed by the Emperor's direct touch and therefore worthy of the chapter's deepest respect. Navigators, the mutant humans whose third eye allows them to perceive the light of the Astronomicon and guide ships through the warp, are similarly honored. The Black Templars depend on navigators to guide their crusade fleets across the galaxy, and they view the navigators' ability to see the Emperor's light as a divine gift that places them above the suspicion that attaches to other psychers. It is the rogue psychers, the alien sorcerers, and the chaos warlocks that the Black Templars despise. These are the witches they have sworn to abhor and destroy. These are the ones who have taken the dangerous gift of psychic power and turned it to dark purposes, using it to commune with demons, to corrupt the faithful, and to tear holes in the fabric of reality through which the nightmares of the warp can pour into the material universe. Against these enemies, the Black Templars show no mercy and no restraint. The practical implications of this doctrine are significant. On the tabletop and in the lore, the Black Templars compensate for their lack of librarians in several ways. Their chaplains, always important in Space Marine chapters, take on an even more central role among the Black Templars, providing not just spiritual guidance, but also the kind of battlefield buffs that librarians normally deliver. The chaplain's litanies of hatred and devotion serve a similar function to psychic powers, inspiring the warriors around them to feats of superhuman valor and fury. The Black Templars have also developed specific tactics and equipment to counter psykers, as their hatred of the witch is not just ideological, it is practical. They train extensively to fight against psychically enhanced enemies, and they have access to equipment and stratagems designed specifically to neutralize psychic threats. On the battlefield, a Black Templar facing a psyker opponent fights with a righteous fury that goes beyond even the chapter's normally intense combat style. The sight of a witch exercising their power is enough to send a Black Templar into a killing frenzy that is almost impossible to stop. There have been moments in the chapter's history where this hatred of psykers has led to incidents that other chapters and imperial organizations find troubling. The defense of Aralan in 812 of the 41st Millennium is one such example. When the floating hive cities of Aralan were infected by a mind plague that caused latent psykers to manifest uncontrollable psychic storms, the Black Templars responded with devastating force. They launched a full assault on the floating hives, their gunships smashing through the stained glass orbs that protected each district, and disgorged squads of warriors who cut down every citizen that stood in their path as they hunted down and exterminated the rogue psykers. The casualties were significant. Not all of those who died were psykers, but the Black Templars did not discriminate. In their view, a population that harbored psykers was a population that harbored a potential conduit to the warp, a vector through which chaos could infect and destroy an entire world. Better to purge the taint ruthlessly than to allow it to spread. Better to lose a few hundred innocent lives than to see a world fall to damnation. This absolutist approach to the witch makes the Black Templars uncomfortable allies for many imperial organizations. The Inquisition, which employs sanctioned psykers extensively and views psychic power as a tool to be controlled rather than an abomination to be destroyed, has clashed with the Black Templars on multiple occasions. Other Space Marine chapters, which employ librarians as a matter of course and see psychic ability as a valuable asset, sometimes find the Black Templars' stance frustrating and counterproductive. But the Black Templars do not care about other people's comfort. They care about the Emperor's will, and they believe, with the unshakable conviction that defines their entire existence, that the Emperor's will is for the witch to be destroyed, not managed, not controlled, not studied or utilized or carefully monitored, destroyed, completely, utterly, and without exception. This belief is not mere prejudice. It is rooted in the Black Templars' understanding of the universe as a place where the forces of chaos are always watching, always waiting, always looking for an opening through which they can pour their corruption into the material world. Every psyker, no matter how well-intentioned, is a potential doorway to the warp. Every exercise of psychic power is a crack in the barrier between reality and nightmare. The Black Templars have seen too many worlds fall to chaos, too many faithful servants of the Emperor twisted into abominations by the uncontrolled power of the warp, to treat this threat with anything less than absolute ferocity. Rather hilariously, the Black Templars are not entirely certain why they do not have librarians. Because the librarius normally maintains a chapter's records, the Black Templars have allowed their understanding of their own history to fall into decay on this particular point. For the time being, they have come to the conclusion that the loss of the librarius is simply part of the Emperor's grand design, and should he see fit to bless them with librarians again, they would gladly use them. Until that day, the witch will be abhorred, the witch will be destroyed, and the Black Templars will fight on, relying on faith and steel rather than sorcery and psychic power, as they believe the Emperor intended. This approach has served them well for 10,000 years. And it is unlikely to change anytime soon. There are moments in the history of the Imperium when the sheer scale of the threat facing humanity is so vast, so overwhelming, that the normal mechanisms of defense simply cannot cope. The Horus Heresy was such a moment. The 13th Black Crusade would be another. But in between these apocalyptic events, there was a conflict that very nearly ended the Imperium 500 years after the heresy, a war so devastating that it reshaped the political landscape of human civilization and pushed even the most powerful chapters to the brink of annihilation. The War of the Beast. In the middle of the 32nd millennium, roughly 500 years after the Horus Heresy, and a greenskin warlord of staggering power emerged from the galactic periphery at the head of an invasion force that dwarfed anything the Orcs had fielded since the Ulanor Crusade of the Great Crusade era. This was not a disorganized mob of tribal savages throwing themselves at imperial defenses with their usual enthusiasm. This was a coordinated, disciplined military campaign led by a warlord so intelligent, so strategic, so terrifyingly capable that he spoke perfect Imperial Gothic and could match the tactical acumen of humanity's finest military minds. The Beast, as this warlord came to be known, launched a multi-pronged invasion of the Imperium that overwhelmed sector after sector with alarming speed. Entire subsectors were overrun. Billions upon billions of Imperial citizens perished. The gravitational and psychic disturbances generated by the greenskin forces drove millions to madness, and some humans, in their desperation, even founded cults dedicated to worshipping the Beast himself. The response of the Imperium's leadership was, to put it charitably, inadequate. The High Lords of Terror, the ruling council that governed in the Emperor's name, were consumed by petty political rivalries and institutional jealousy. The Lord Commander of the Imperium proved more interested in consolidating his own power than in responding to the existential threat bearing down on humanity. The Imperial Navy's Grand Admiral gathered his fleet for reasons that had nothing to do with defending the Imperium. And the Adeptus Mechanicus was hoarding secrets about the Greenskins that might have saved millions of lives. Into this vacuum of leadership stepped the Black Templars. High Marshal Bohemond was commanding the relatively small Vulpes Crusade when the Beast's invasion began. He was a divisive figure, even by the standards of the Black Templars' proud and stubborn leadership. Bohemond possessed the chapter's characteristic fervor and martial prowess, but he also displayed a degree of stubbornness and political tone-deafness that would cause problems throughout the war. Where Sigismund's stubbornness had been tempered by wisdom and strategic vision, Bohemond's was more raw, more reactive, driven by pride rather than purpose. But whatever his flaws, Bohemond recognized the gravity of the situation faster than most of the Imperium's leaders. He helped save survivors of the Fist's Exemplar, a fellow Imperial Fist's successor, chapter that had been devastated by the Greenskin onslaught, and he expressed his intention to reunite the scattered successor chapters of the Imperial Fists to confront the Beast. This was a momentous decision. The Last Wall Protocol, a secret contingency plan established by Rogel Dawn himself before his death, called for the Imperial Fists and all their successors to reunite in the event of a threat to the Sol system itself. The War of the Beast was exactly the kind of catastrophe that Dawn had foreseen. Bohemond represented the Black Templars at the meeting of the Fist's successor chapters in the Fall system, and he led the combined Sons of Dawn expedition to the Sol system aboard the vessel Abhorrence, the chapter's temporary flagship, while the Eternal Crusader was undergoing refit. The combined force that arrived over Terra was impressive. 20 battle barges and strike cruisers carrying 2,800 battle brothers from the Black Templars, Crimson Fists, Fists Exemplar, and Excoriators. The battle for Terra was desperate. The Greenskins had deployed massive attack moons, artificial planetoids bristling with weapons, in orbit above humanity's cradle world. The combined Astartes force, supported by forces from the Adeptus Mechanicus, launched an assault on the attack moon using cyclonic torpedoes to disable its surface weapons stations. But the station's gravitational weapon was still active, and it inflicted devastating losses on the Imperial forces during the landing operations. Bohemond led from the front, as was his nature. During the final push on the beast's temple gargant, in a war machine of staggering proportions that served as both a fortress and a mobile weapon of mass destruction, the Black Templars fought alongside their brother chapters with a fury that even the greenskins found impressive. But the beast was a foe beyond anything the Astartes could handle alone. It fell to the Primarch Vulcan, who had mysteriously returned to aid the Imperium in its darkest hour, to confront the monster directly. During this confrontation, Bohemond's character was tested and found wanting. He objected when Corland, the last surviving Imperial fist who had been elevated to the position of Lord Commander, ordered the Astartes to evacuate and let Vulcan fight the beast alone. Bohemond's challenge to Corland's authority was not merely tactical disagreement. Yes, it was a challenge to the entire command structure that the Sons of Dawn had assembled. Vulcan himself intervened, offering a test. If Bohemond could lift his hammer Doom Tremor, the Primarch would allow him to become the new Lord Commander. Bohemond failed, as did every other contender, and the humiliation silenced him. When Corland struck Bohemond for his continued insubordination, the High Marshal simply remained on the ground in shame. This incident illustrates something important about the Black Templars. Their faith and their fury are their greatest strengths, but those same qualities can become weaknesses when they are not tempered by wisdom and humility. Sigismund had possessed both the zeal of a true believer and the tactical intelligence to channel that zeal effectively. Bohemond possessed the zeal but sometimes lacked the wisdom, and the result was a leader who occasionally let his pride override his judgment. But the War of the Beast was not decided by the failings of individual leaders. It was decided by the collective courage of thousands of warriors who refused to give up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The Black Templars fought through multiple campaigns on Olenor, the Greenskins' fortress world, enduring losses that would have shattered lesser chapters. They witnessed the death of Corland at the hands of the beast. They fought alongside Imperial Fist's successors, Adeptus Mechanicus forces, and even, in one extraordinary incident, an uneasy temporary alliance between Black Templars under Marshal Magneric and Iron Warriors under Warsmith Calcator, who found themselves facing a common enemy so dangerous that ancient hatreds had to be set aside. The war ended with the beast's eventual defeat, but the cost was staggering. The Imperial Fists chapter was virtually destroyed, reduced to a single surviving member before being rebuilt. The other successor chapters were badly mauled, and the political landscape of the Imperium was transformed, with the Grand Master of Assassins, Drakan Vangorich, eventually conducting a bloody coup that eliminated nearly the entire High Lord Council. Bohemond himself did not survive the war's aftermath. He was killed by Zerberin of the Fist's Exemplar during a confrontation over whether Iron Warriors' allies should be spared in recognition of their contributions to the war effort. Bohemond refused to back down, true to the Black Templars' uncompromising nature, and paid for it with his life. The War of the Beast was a pivotal moment for the Black Templars. It demonstrated both the chapter's incredible martial prowess and the dangers of their rigid, uncompromising approach to warfare and diplomacy. But it also reinforced the lessons that Sigismund had taught them. The enemies of the Emperor never stop, the threats facing humanity are perpetual, and the only appropriate response is eternal vigilance and eternal war. The crusade continued. It always continues. The hero of Hell's Reach, Grimaldus, and the fires of Armageddon. There are certain moments in the history of the Black Templars that crystallize everything the chapter stands for, that take all the abstract concepts of faith and duty and devotion and compress them into a single, its blinding point of heroism so intense that it leaves a mark on the galaxy itself. The defense of Hell's Reach Hive during the Third War for Armageddon is one of those moments, and the warrior at its center, the man who embodied the Black Templars' spirit of defiance in its purest form, was Chaplain Merrick Grimaldus. To understand Grimaldus, you need to understand what a chaplain means to the Black Templars. In most chapters, chaplains are important figures, the spiritual guides who maintain the morale and discipline of their brothers. But in the Black Templars, where faith is not merely encouraged but mandatory, where worship of the Emperor as a divine being permeates every aspect of chapter life, the chaplains are something more. They are priests in the truest sense, or warrior holy men whose word carries the weight of divine authority and whose presence on the battlefield is a tangible manifestation of the Emperor's will. Grimaldus was a product of this tradition. A veteran of a score of successful crusades, he had distinguished himself at an early age, becoming the youngest sword brother in the chapter's history. His faith was not the quiet, contemplative devotion of a scholar or a mystic. It was the cold, burning fury of a warrior who had looked into the face of the galaxy's horrors and responded not with fear or despair, but with righteous wrath. He was inducted into the mysteries of the Reclusium after the Battle of Fire and Blood, and his mentor was Mordred, the previous Reclusiarch of the Black Templars. When Mordred fell in battle, his dying act was to appoint Grimaldus as his successor, and a decision that the young chaplain would spend the rest of his life proving worthy of. The Third War for Armageddon began in 998 of the 41st Millennium, when the Orc warlord Gazgkul Mag Uruk Thraka returned to the hive world of Armageddon at the head of the largest greenskin force seen since the War of the Beast. This was a massive invasion, a tidal wave of greenskin savagery that threatened to overwhelm the planet's defenses through sheer numbers and unbridled aggression. High Marshal Helbrecht responded to the threat by mustering 3 crusades of the Black Templars. He himself took command of the combined Space Marine fleet in orbit, his naval expertise making him the natural choice to coordinate the Void Battle. But the surface war needed its own champions, and Helbrecht chose Grimaldus to lead the Hell's Reach Crusade, and assigning him 100 battle brothers with the task of defending one of Armageddon's largest industrial centers. Hell's Reach Hive was a sprawling industrial complex, a city of millions, whose factories and refineries produced war material vital to the planetary defense. Its strategic position and control of underwater pipelines, connecting it to the resource-rich Deadlands, made it one of the earliest targets of the Orc invasion. When Grimaldus arrived to take command of the defense, he found a city that was already preparing for the worst, and a garrison that included regiments of the Armageddon Steel Legion, 19 god machines of the Legio Invigilata, civilian militias, and 97 battle sisters of the Order of the Argent Shroud. The odds were not favorable. The Orc horde bearing down on Hell's Reach numbered in the millions, a green flood of savagery that would hit the city from multiple directions simultaneously. But Grimaldus did not measure the odds. He measured the faith of his defenders and found it sufficient. The siege that followed was one of the most brutal urban engagements in the history of the Third War for Armageddon. The Orcs attacked from every direction, swarming the city's defenses with a relentlessness that pushed the defenders to their absolute limits. Hell's Reach found itself besieged by millions of greenskins, who attacked not only from the landward approaches, but also from a vast fleet of submersibles launched from the icy Deadlands far to the south. The underwater assault caught the defenders off guard and threatened to open a second front that could not be contained. Through it all, Grimaldus was everywhere. He fought in the streets, and he fought on the walls. He fought in the sewers and the factories and the hab blocks, his skull-faced chaplain's helm becoming a symbol of defiance that the defenders of Hell's Reach rallied around like a banner. His sermons, delivered in the midst of battle with a voice that carried over the din of gunfire and explosions, were legendary. When the Orcs breached the outer defenses and the defenders' morale began to falter, Grimaldus did not offer comforting words or gentle reassurance. He offered fury. There is a speech attributed to Grimaldus from the defense of Hell's Reach that captures his character perfectly. Standing before the assembled defenders, human and Astartes alike, as the Orc horde gathered beyond the walls, Grimaldus did not acknowledge the danger. He did not discuss the odds. He insulted the enemy. Yet his words questioned how the greenskins could dare attack a city held by such formidable defenders. He pointed to the guns, the walls, the thousands of warriors standing ready, and he asked, with genuine indignation, whether this ragtag mob of Xenos filth was really all the enemy could muster. It was not a speech designed to reassure. It was a speech designed to transform fear into anger, and anger into weapons-grade fury. And it worked. The defenders of Hell's Reach, who moments before had been contemplating the very real possibility of their own deaths, straightened their backs, gripped their weapons, and prepared to make the orcs pay for every inch of ground in blood. The fighting around the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant was the climax of the siege. As this vast basilica had stood on Armageddon since the earliest days of human colonization, a monument to faith that had survived millennia of conflict and upheaval. When the orcs breached the outer perimeter and reached the temple precinct, the fighting devolved into the kind of brutal, close-quarters melee that the Black Templars lived for. For nearly 2 solar months, the defenders held the temple against repeated assaults. The orcs looted and destroyed priceless holy relics in equal measure, their crude hands defiling artifacts that had been sacred to the people of Armageddon for thousands of years. The human militia and Imperial Guard units fought with a courage that impressed even the Space Marines, but as the weeks dragged on and the casualties mounted, the defenders were pushed further and further back. Eventually, the orcs penetrated the temple precincts and the fighting moved inside, among the columns and pews and altars that had once echoed with hymns of devotion. The militia and guard units fled. The Black Templars did not. Grimaldus, standing in the ruins of the temple he had sworn to defend, bellowed the words that would become his epitaph and his legend. "I have dug my grave in this place, and I will either triumph or I will die." The effect on the fleeing defenders was immediate and electrifying. Hearing the chaplain's defiance, knowing that the Black Templars were still fighting, still refusing to yield, even as the temple crumbled around them, the Imperial forces turned around and threw themselves back into the fray. The orcs, who had thought the battle won, and suddenly found themselves facing a reinvigorated defense that hit them with the fury of men who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The battle ended when the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant collapsed. The entire structure, weakened by months of combat and the orcs' own destructive efforts, came down in a cascade of stone and steel that buried defenders and attackers alike. All were thought lost. A day later, Grimaldus crawled out of the rubble. He emerged from the ruins carrying 3 relics of the temple: a broken Aquila statue, the remains of the founding charter of Hellsreach, and an orb containing the last of the temple's holy water. The apothecaries who treated his wounds afterward claimed it was a miracle that he still lived, let alone that he had the strength to dig himself free of tons of debris and carry sacred objects to safety. His armor was shattered. His body was broken in a dozen places. By any medical assessment, he should have been dead. But Grimaldus refused to die. He had dug his grave in that place, as he had promised. But the Emperor apparently had other plans for him. When the season of fire began, a natural phenomenon on Armageddon where violent storms rack the skies and make further combat impossible, the citizens of Hellsreach honored Grimaldus with the greatest title they could bestow: Hero of Hellsreach. When he walked through the streets of the battered city, the survivors bowed before him, recognizing in this bloodied, broken chaplain the living embodiment of everything that had saved their world from destruction. Grimaldus would go on to become the Reclusiarch, and then the High Chaplain of the Black Templars, the senior-most spiritual authority in the chapter. He crossed the Rubicon Primaris, undergoing the transformation into a Primaris Space Marine, and he continues to serve the chapter as one of its most revered and feared warriors. He is accompanied into battle by Cenobite servitors, each bearing one of the surviving relics from the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant, a constant reminder of his most famous victory and a visible symbol of the power of faith in the face of impossible odds. On Armageddon itself, a cult has formed around Grimaldus. The citizens who survived the Third War worship him as a living saint, gathering at the ruins of the temple of the Emperor Ascendant to perform rituals in his name. Some dig ceremonial graves and cover them with shrouds, believing that, just as Grimaldus rose from the ruins once before, he might rise again from such a ritual pit to defend Hellsreach if the need ever arises. It is a touching expression of faith, and one that the Black Templars, for all their stern and uncompromising nature, have not moved to suppress. After all, if anyone has earned the devotion of ordinary humans, it is Merrick Grimaldus, the chaplain who refused to die. The story of Hellsreach is the story of the Black Templars distilled to its essence: faith against overwhelming odds, defiance in the face of certain death, the refusal to yield, to retreat, to accept any outcome other than victory or glorious martyrdom. Grimaldus did not save Hellsreach through superior tactics or overwhelming firepower. He saved it through the sheer force of his will, his faith, and his willingness to stand in the path of destruction and dare it to do its worst. That is what it means to be a Black Templar. Helbrecht, the High Marshal who never stops fighting. If Grimaldus represents the spiritual heart of the Black Templars, then High Marshal Helbrecht represents their martial soul. He is the current leader of the chapter, the most powerful individual in one of the most powerful military organizations in the Imperium, and he has earned his position through a career of such relentless violence and unwavering determination that even his enemies grudgingly respect him. Helbrecht was born on the hive world of piety, a name that carries a certain ironic weight given the chapter he would eventually join. Unbeknownst to him during his childhood, a group of custodes of the Aquilan shield, the Emperor's own bodyguards, watched over and protected him, guided by the prophecies of their doomscryers who had foreseen his importance to the Imperium's future. When the Black Templars recruited him into their chapter, they were fulfilling a destiny that had been set in motion before Helbrecht drew his first breath. From his earliest days as a neophyte, Helbrecht was marked by three qualities that would define his career: violence, stubbornness, and an unshakable loyalty to the Emperor. He was not a subtle warrior. He was not a political operator or a diplomatic negotiator. He was a blunt instrument of the Emperor's wrath, a weapon that pointed in one direction, forward, and did not stop until everything in front of it was dead. His rise through the ranks was driven by his success in some of the most dangerous campaigns the chapter had undertaken in recent memory. The Vinculus Crusade, one of his earliest significant engagements, saw the young Helbrecht fighting under the legendary High Marshal Ludoldus, alongside Inquisitor Vinculus and the Adepta Sororitas's Order of the Bloody Rose. The campaign took the combined forces to Pelargon 4, a hellish lava world of shifting tectonic plates and rivers of magma, where they stormed a massive cult temple and fought their way through its defenders in some of the most brutal combat Helbrecht had yet experienced. He secured his place in the Sword Brethren by slaying a warp-spawned vampire that had risen to power on the hive world of Tephian 4, a feat that required both extraordinary martial skill and the kind of fearless determination that the Black Templars prize above all other qualities. When the Crusade's leader, Marshal Didin, was killed, Helbrecht was elected to replace him, and from there, his trajectory was set. The death of High Marshal Cord Hell at the hands of a Chaos champion in 989 of the 41st Millennium created a vacancy at the top of the chapter's hierarchy. The Marshals of the Black Templars, those autonomous commanders who led the chapter's various crusade fleets across the galaxy, gathered to choose a successor. The vote was unanimous. Helbrecht's reputation, built on the subjugation of the Xenarchs of the Sigillari Nebula and a string of other successful campaigns, made him the obvious choice. But his first act as High Marshal was characteristic of his aggressive nature. He launched a crusade against the Sithor fiends in the Ghoul Stars, one of the most dangerous and poorly explored regions of the galaxy. No Imperial expedition had ever returned from the Ghoul Stars, but Helbrecht was not deterred. Within 8 years, His forces had exterminated the Xenos population of the outlying systems and were pushing toward the aliens' homeworld, but upon reaching the core systems, they found them eerily empty. The Scythor fiends had vanished without a trace. Before a proper investigation could be launched, a desperate call for help came from the besieged hive world of Armageddon. The Third War for Armageddon had begun, and Helbrecht responded with the urgency and decisiveness that the situation demanded. He contacted Marshals Rickard of the Damaris Crusade and Amalrich of the Tiberior Crusade, ordering them to Armageddon, and upon arrival, he assumed overall command of the assembled Space Marine fleet. Helbrecht's performance during the Third War for Armageddon cemented his reputation as the greatest naval commander in the Adeptus Astartes. Working closely with Admiral Parol of the Imperial Navy, Helbrecht coordinated the defense of Armageddon's orbital approaches against a greenskin fleet that vastly outnumbered the Imperial forces. His tactical acumen, honed by years of directing the vast fleet of the Black Templars across the galaxy, proved decisive. The Orc fleet was held, then pushed back, was then systematically destroyed in a series of engagements that demonstrated the kind of strategic brilliance that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of the Black Templars' martial culture. While Grimaldus fought his legendary defense of Hell's Reach on the surface, Helbrecht fought his own war in the void above, a war that was just as crucial to the planet's survival, even if it lacked the visceral drama of ground combat. Without Helbrecht's command of the orbital battle, the Orcs could have landed reinforcements indefinitely, overwhelming the surface defenses through sheer weight of numbers. By choking the enemy's supply lines and destroying their transport capability, Helbrecht made it possible for the ground forces to hold on long enough for the Orc offensive to stall. When the war ended and the greenskin warlord Gazgakul Thraka fled Armageddon, Helbrecht did something that perfectly encapsulated the Black Templar's character. He did not celebrate, he did not rest, he did not return to the Eternal Crusader for a period of recovery and reflection. He swore a personal oath of vengeance against Gazgakul and set off in pursuit, accompanied by none other than Commissar Yarrick, the legendary Imperial Guard officer whose own hatred of the greenskin warlord was the stuff of Imperial legend. The pairing of Helbrecht and Yarrick was one of the most unlikely and most compelling partnerships in the Imperium's recent history. Here was the High Marshal of the Black Templars, the supreme commander of one of the Imperium's most feared fighting forces, working alongside a mortal human, albeit one of the most extraordinary mortal humans alive in a shared quest for vengeance. It was a partnership born of mutual respect and a common enemy, and it spoke volumes about Helbrecht's character that he was willing to share his crusade with a non-Astartes who had earned his admiration. But Helbrecht's career has not been without its setbacks. During a crusade to the ice world of Schrödinger 7, he encountered the Necron Pharaon Imhotep, the Stormlord of the Sautek dynasty. The Necron Lord had already prepared his defenses with the kind of meticulous precision that characterized his species, and Helbrecht's assault bogged down in a series of expertly placed ambushes. When Helbrecht and Imhotep met face to face on an ice bridge, the duel that followed was intense, but ultimately ended in Helbrecht's defeat. Or rather than killing the High Marshal, however, Imhotep chose a more humiliating punishment. He severed Helbrecht's right hand, a deliberate insult designed to ensure that the High Marshal would always remember his defeat. The loss of his hand could have broken a lesser warrior. For Helbrecht, it became a pilgrimage. He undertook a 5-year crusade of penitence to atone for his defeat, eventually making a pilgrimage to the Phalanx, the great mobile fortress of the Imperial Fists, where he prayed at the hand of Rogel Dawn. The preserved hand of the Primarch, a relic of incomparable significance to all the Sons of Dawn, gave Helbrecht a new perspective on his loss. He came to understand that the loss of his hand was symbolic of his Primarch's sacrifice, and a sign from the Emperor that suffering and loss were not punishments, but opportunities for growth and renewed devotion. Helbrecht's vengeance against Imhotep was characteristically thorough. He eventually destroyed the Stormlord's flagship, the Cairn-class tombship Inevitable Conqueror, by slinging it into a star. It was a fitting response from a warrior who does not know the meaning of the word proportionate. The arrival of the Primaris Space Marines, delivered to the Black Templars by Robert Guilliman's torchbearer fleets following the opening of the Great Rift, presented Helbrecht with one of the most significant challenges of his tenure as High Marshal. Many observers expected the fanatical Black Templars to reject the newcomers. The Primaris were creations of the Ultramarines Primarch, the same Guilliman, whose Codex Astartes the Black Templars had spent 10,000 years ignoring. Would the chapter accept these new warriors, or would they see them as an insult, a Trojan horse designed to bring them into line with Codex doctrine? The answer came when Guilliman himself met Helbrecht aboard the Eternal Crusader. The Primarch reminded the High Marshal that he was responsible to the whole of mankind's realm, not merely to his own personal vendettas and crusading ambitions. It was a pointed message, delivered by the only being in the Imperium who had the authority and the power to make Helbrecht listen. And Helbrecht, to his credit, listened. He accepted the Primaris into the Black Templars' ranks. He promoted a number of his own sword brethren to marshals, creating new crusades composed of former Grey Shields. It's the Primaris Marines who had been serving under Guilliman's command before being distributed to their respective chapters. And he led by example, incorporating the new warriors into the chapter's existing crusade structure without abandoning any of the traditions or beliefs that made the Black Templars who they were. The integration was not entirely smooth. Some crusades experienced friction between the traditional warriors and the newcomers, and the Angevin Crusade in particular saw problems that highlighted the cultural differences between the Primaris recruits and the established Templars. But Helbrecht's acceptance of the Primaris helped convince the various crusade fleets to follow suit, and over time, the Primaris Marines have been absorbed into the chapter's culture with the same thoroughness that the Black Templars bring to everything they do. There has even been talk that Black Templars are especially resilient when crossing the Rubicon Primaris, the dangerous surgical procedure that transforms a firstborn Marine into a Primaris. Whether this is a result of their genetic heritage as Sons of Dawn, or whether it is a reward for their faith in the Emperor, is a question that the Black Templars themselves would answer without hesitation. It is the Emperor's blessing given to his most devoted servants, and no further explanation is needed. Under Helbrecht's command, the Black Templars have continued to expand and intensify their crusading activities. Notable active crusade fleets include the Armageddon Crusade, commanded personally by Helbrecht and said to be the largest and most experienced active crusade. The Heimdall Crusade, deployed as part of the Indomitus Crusade fleet near the Eye of Terror. The Morsius Crusade, battling the leagues of Votan near the Galactic Core, and many others, each pursuing its own objectives across the vast and war-torn galaxy. The opening of the Great Rift, which literally tore the galaxy in half and created a barrier of warp energy that disrupted communications and travel across the Imperium, was a catastrophe for most Imperial organizations. For the Black Templars, it was an opportunity. Rather than using the reactivation of the Astronomicon as a reprieve to consolidate and recuperate, the Black Templars instead undertook a vicious purge against the new wave of mutation and heresy that had erupted in the wake of the Noctis Aeterna, the period of total darkness that preceded the Rift's stabilization. Other crusades redoubled their efforts against the enemies of mankind. New chapter keeps were raised on worlds that had been cut off from the Imperium for decades, and the Eternal Crusade rolled on, undimmed and undeterred by a catastrophe that had brought the rest of the Imperium to its knees. Several crusade fleets were discovered to have vanished during the Noctis Aeterna, lost to the warp or destroyed by enemies that struck during the period of confusion. But even this loss did not slow the Black Templars. They simply launched new crusades to replace the ones that had been lost, drawing on their deep reserves of warriors and their network of chapter keeps to assemble new forces and new fleets. For the Black Templars, the Great Rift was not a crisis, it was a confirmation. The galaxy was descending further into darkness and war, just as Sigismund had predicted 10,000 years ago. The enemies of the Emperor were growing bolder and more numerous. The threats facing humanity were multiplying, and the only appropriate response was the one the Black Templars had been giving since the day they left Terra. More war, more crusading, more faith, more fury, more of everything that made them the most relentless fighting force in the Imperium. Helbrecht has guided the chapter through this tumultuous period with the same combination of aggressive campaigning and strategic acumen that has defined his tenure as High Marshal. He is older now, his body bearing the scars of a lifetime of warfare, his right hand replaced by a bionic prosthetic that serves as a constant reminder of his defeat at the hands of Imhotep and the pilgrimage of penitence that followed. But his spirit is undiminished, his faith is unshaken, and his determination to pursue the eternal crusade to its ultimate conclusion, whatever that might look like, is as absolute as it was the day he first swore the oath of the High Marshal. The galaxy trembles before him, and with good reason. The legacy of the Black Cross, what the Black Templars mean. We have traveled a long road together through this story. From the refugee camps of the Ionis Plateau to the burning walls of the Imperial Palace, from the void around the Cadian Gate to the collapsing temple of the Emperor Ascendant on Armageddon, from the founding of the chapter to the opening of the Great Rift and beyond. 10,000 years of history condensed into the story of a single chapter of Space Marines who decided on the day of their creation that they would never stop fighting. But what does it all mean? What is the significance of the Black Templars in the broader context of the Warhammer universe? Why do they resonate so strongly with the fans and the lore enthusiasts who spend their time exploring the grim darkness of the far future? The answer, I think, lies in the concept of conviction. The Black Templars are, above all else, a chapter defined by their absolute conviction in the rightness of their cause. In a universe where ambiguity is the norm, where even the most righteous actors are compromised by the systems they serve and the choices they make, the Black Templars stand apart as warriors who suffer no doubts, entertain no second thoughts, and accept no compromise. They believe what they believe with a totality that is both inspiring and terrifying, and they act on those beliefs with a consistency that is as admirable as it is sometimes horrifying. Their faith in the Emperor is absolute, not conditional, not qualified, not hedged with philosophical reservations. Absolute. The Emperor is God. His will is law. His enemies are the enemies of all mankind. And the proper response to those enemies is not negotiation, not containment, not careful management of threats, but total, unrelenting annihilation. The Black Templars do not manage threats. They destroy them. Completely, utterly, and without mercy. This makes them uncomfortable companions for many of the Imperium's other defenders. The Inquisition, which deals in subtlety and information and the careful manipulation of power, finds the Black Templars' directness frustrating. Other Space Marine chapters, which have learned to balance their martial duties with political awareness and diplomatic engagement, sometimes view the Black Templars as dangerously simplistic. And the civilian population of the Imperium, while grateful for the protection the Black Templars provide, often finds their fanaticism frightening. But the Black Templars do not exist to be comfortable. They exist to fight. And in a galaxy where the threats facing humanity are literally infinite, where chaos gods scheme in dimensions beyond human comprehension, where alien empires with millions of years of history view humanity as prey, and where the Imperium itself is held together by corruption and cruelty as much as by faith and courage, the Black Templars' straightforward approach to problem-solving has a certain refreshing clarity. They cut through the noise. They cut through the politics. They cut through the ambiguity and the moral complexity and the endless bureaucratic obstructions that hamstring the Imperium's response to every threat. And they replace all of it with a single, simple question. Is it the Emperor's enemy? If yes, kill it. If no, move on and find something that is. The Black Templars' heritage draws from some of the most fascinating military orders in human history. Their name and their ethos are inspired by the Knights Templar, the medieval military order of the Catholic Church that combined monastic discipline with martial ferocity. Their Germanic undertones and their active crusading against perceived heretics echo the Teutonic Knights, another medieval military order that carved out an empire in the Baltic through a combination of religious zeal and military prowess. And their visual iconography, the black and white color scheme, the Maltese crosses, the chains and purity seals, and devotional imagery, draws from the Knights Hospitaller, yet another order that blended warfare with religious devotion. These historical parallels are not accidental. They are part of what makes the Black Templars so compelling as characters in the Warhammer universe. They tap into a deep cultural memory of warrior monks, of fighters who combined physical prowess with spiritual devotion, who believed that their martial service was an act of worship and their battlefield victories were offerings to God. The Black Templars are the 41st Millennium's answer to the Crusader Knight, and they carry with them all the romance and all the horror that such a comparison implies. Because let us be clear, the Black Templars are not heroes in any conventional sense. They are loyal servants of a totalitarian theocracy that has perpetuated suffering on an unimaginable scale. Their crusades have consumed entire worlds. Their intolerance of psychers has led to the deaths of countless innocents. Their refusal to compromise, while admirable in the abstract, has sometimes led to outcomes that a more flexible approach might have avoided. They are, like everything in the Warhammer universe, deeply flawed, yet their virtues inseparable from their vices, their heroism indistinguishable from their fanaticism. But that is what makes them interesting. That is what makes them worthy of study and admiration and argument. The Black Templars force us to grapple with questions about the nature of faith, the costs of conviction, and the line between devotion and extremism. They ask us to consider whether there are circumstances in which absolute certainty is appropriate, and whether the alternative, doubt and hesitation and the paralysis of analysis, might be even more dangerous in a universe as hostile as the one they inhabit. In the end, the Black Templars endure. They have endured for 10,000 years, through catastrophes that have broken other chapters, through political upheavals that have toppled empires, as through the slow decay of the Imperium itself. They endure because their purpose is clear, their faith is strong, and their commitment to the eternal crusade is total. The galaxy is vast, and it is dark, and it is full of things that hate humanity with a passion that transcends understanding. But somewhere in that darkness, black-armored warriors are marching. Their boots are striking metal decking in time to hymns that have not changed since the founding. Their blades are chained to their wrists. Their prayers are rising to the Emperor on the golden throne. And they will never, ever stop. The eternal crusade continues, as it always has, as it always will. No pity, no remorse, no fear. And with that, we reach the end of our journey through the history and legacy of the Black Templars. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most fascinating and fearsome chapters in the Warhammer universe, then please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. There are many more stories to tell, many more chapters of the Imperium's bloody history to explore, and I want to bring them all to you in the way they deserve to be told. So subscribe, hit the bell notification so you never miss an upload, and until next time, may the Emperor protect you, and may your faith never waver. The crusade awaits.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.